Welcome back to the channel. This is the Action Figure Grader, and today we're going to look at some recent prices on eBay for vintage Star Wars. We've got some mint on cards as well as some loose graded, and as you can see by this thumbnail, two very high grade examples for some of the more popular characters from the Kenner line sold for huge prices. So we're going to look at those as well as the population report for them using the spreadsheet that my buddy Jason Woods put together, and very kindly, I mean, it was a lot of work, and he sent that to me as a gift. Just a really awesome thing he did. So we'll take a look at that, and then, you know, just a very nice assortment here. All these are fairly recent sales on eBay. So let's take a look. All right, the first one we've got, and we'll look at the Hakes data in a second, but this is a 12 back A R2-D2 punched example, no price sticker, AFA 80 clear blister. Very, very nice example. And that's sold at $14.10 in an auction, $14.10. So here's the label on it, 80, 80, 85, overall 80 grade for the 12 back A, Hong Kong COO. All right, so we got that, and I was like, well, how's that compare to recent sales? And I try to remember to do this for 12 backs especially, only because I don't follow 12 backs that closely, and I just think it would be helpful to see some past data points from Hakes, where probably the vast majority of 12 backs sell, right, is on Hakes, and how those prices have changed over the years. So at first blush, that seemed like a pretty good deal, $14.10 for a 12 back A. And here's all of the ones that are AFA 80s that I could find on Hakes in terms of closed data. 3 of the 4 of these had the SKU on the footer stand. So it kind of throws the data out, right? Because the SKU on the footer stand sells for a huge multiple versus a standard 12 back A. And the only other 12 back A was an unpunched example with a price sticker that was the made in Taiwan. That one sold for $8.89, and that was back in March of 2020. So over 5 years ago, that one sold for $8.89. But the other ones that are SKU on the footer stand, the price, it's crazy. The prices range from $1,856 to $6,200. And, you know, in all fairness, the lowest of those price points, $1,856, that sold back in November of 2019. So 5.5 years ago, very long time ago. The other 2 data points are maybe a little more recent, $4,600 and $6,300. But it's interesting, I couldn't find a 12 back R2-D2A AFA 80 that had sold. And if we type in 12 back A on R2-D2 just AFA and don't include the 80 on there, then maybe we can find some more data. And looking at them, you know, it's a lot of the same ones. SKU on the footer stand, made in Taiwan's, SKU on the footer stand. So here's a 12 back A, AFA 85. This was an AFA 85. I would imagine this is probably from the Jeff Jacobs collection. This one sold in March of 2023. So it was not the Jeff Jacobs collection, but it was obviously a very expensive item. 12 back A, that sold for $17,700. And that was punched for an AFA 85. And then you compare it to this AFA 80 that basically sold for less than 10% of that price. That feels like a good deal to me when you look at it that way. Now, again, I'm not saying an AFA 80 is the same as an AFA 85. It's not, obviously. It's much easier to find. But would you rather pay $1,400 or would you rather pay $17,700 for the exact same item? Both of them punched and both of them without a price sticker. So you can call those very much the same other than the grade, right? To me, I'd rather have the AFA 80. That's just me. Here was a 12 back A, let's see, I'm not sure which one this is, but this is a 12 back that had this weird strip going through it. If you remember, I talked about this in my what to buy video, and I was just thinking that there must have been some kind of multi-pack that they sold that had, maybe some 12 backs packed together, because it's got this huge sticker right there, or tear on the card. And then when you look at the C-3PO that they also sold, it also had similar damage on there. So I'm just wondering if they had them kind of taped together in some kind of weird multi-pack, dumping them, on the market. I don't know. It could just be bad storage from the seller. Who knows? But The C-3PO sold for $660. The R2-D2 sold for $391. Obviously, with the heavy damage, that makes sense. But I just wanted to point that out. And if you guys know of that, maybe comment. But I know I've seen some Canadian multi-packs where they kind of glue them together. But for some reason, something in the back of my mind had like a discount multi-pack where they wrapped a 2-for-1 price ribbon around them. And, again, I might be misremembering it, but I vaguely remember seeing something like that on Facebook. But anyway, back to Villains items. This seller is one I bought from in the past. They had a bunch of items that were kind of across the range that I wanted to cover. And this is a 20-back Death Star droid that was obviously in fairly rough shape. It had lots of edge wear, but this is, again, a very collector-friendly type item that would be good for someone just wanting to have it in their collection, not like an investment grade type of item. $255 on that one. This is that action figure carrying case, the Star Wars action figure carrying case. It was unused contents. It was no longer kind of factory sealed with the plastic around it, but it did include, these flyers. And what's interesting is that the one flyer is the hard to find one that has like this kit bashed Boba Fett that kind of, I talked about this in the What to Buy video when this auction was still live, that this kit bash Boba Fett was an actual item, right? It's not like it was manufactured or for the printing of this particular flyer. There was somebody at the Kenner factory, in the engineering department that did put this figure together. And, obviously it very closely resembles the final production figure, but there's some obvious differences. The rocket on the back is much more pronounced. Obviously, the colors and the sculpt of the figure, they probably kit bashed it using parts from another toy line. Who knows? But it was never found. That's the most interesting thing about it. This actual figure was never found, so it's kind of disappeared, and it kind of lives on in lore and with lots of rumors as to what happened to it when you read some of the archive articles about it. Now, I wish I could remember where it was. It was either on SWCA or maybe Imperial Gunnery. It was one of those, Rebel Scum, who knows. But it was one of those websites where I saw a long discussion thread about it where people had been trying to track it down, including ex-Kenner folks, and it never was found. So, for whatever that's worth, as a result, this particular example of the action figure carrying case, which is a Star Wars case that included this kit bash picture of Boba Fett, is very sought after. And you can see that in the sales price. It sold for $519, unused sticker sheet, and, basically unused content. So it was just a kind of a cool item that I thought was worth pointing out to you guys. But that one did sell. Same seller also had a factory sealed 12-inch Princess Leia Organa that was probably in about a 75 plus grade condition, somewhere in there. It's always hard to kind of gauge the grade on a 12-inch just because of all the weird angles and the box flap and things like that. But it didn't really appear to have much damage to the flap, just some light creases around the window and things like that. But, factory sealed, I think that probably is about a 75 plus, somewhere in there. And that one sold for $465.88 in an auction. And then they, of course, had the mail-away Boba Fett, which is always hard to find with the box. This box was not in great condition. You can see the obvious damage to the box. So that kept the price down. I still would argue that $835 is a pretty fair price. If you graded it, I'm not saying that you should, but if you wanted to grade it, it probably wouldn't get higher than about a 70 because of the box condition. The catalog was also had some obvious wear to it, which would bring it down, but I think you'd probably get 80s or so for the baggie and the paperwork, but the box, because of all the major damage to it, I think at best, I think the overall grade, because of the box score, it would be about a 70. Maybe 70 plus, somewhere in there. But $835 is not a bad deal for 100% complete mail-away Boba Fett to include the box, and that's really where the value is on this. The Boba Fett baggie, those have come down, probably $300. The other, the note to consumers also can be tricky to track down. The catalog is not. But the note to consumers is obviously Boba Fett specific, as far as I know, since it has the spring launch rocket being removed for safety reasons, and so it was kind of like an apology note from Kenner. So that makes the note and the box is what makes this one so expensive at $835. Then we dig in to the two loose graded gems that this vintage toy auctions had. This seller, if you remember, had an AFA U90 Plus regular Taiwan Boba Fett and an AFA U90 Plus Hong Kong Boba Fett that sold a few weeks ago. Both of those sold for between $2,000 and $2,300 for the Taiwan. This is a one of one. All right, this is Population 1, which we'll show you in a second. But this is the light blue painted head Taiwan Boba Fett, a very sought after variant as it is. But this is an uncirculated 90 plus grade. And how this seller managed to get a hold of all of these, I will never know. And you can see the final sales price on that, $4,350. And I showed you this in a what to buy video a couple of weeks back, and I said it'll probably, I would think, be worth at least $3,000, given that the regular Taiwan sold for about $2,300. And I think I posited in that video that it probably would say $3,500. That was kind of my guess. So as you can tell, I was already low even after making my guess. It still went well above that number. And if you pull up the population report, and again, this information was supplied by my buddy Jason. He put all of this together for every character, loose graded. And for the light blue painted head Taiwan Boba Fett, there's only 68 on the census, which I found very interesting. I did not realize that there's only 68 of these graded by AFA. 26 of those 68 are graded less than 85. 32 of the 68, which I find the most fascinating, is that of all of the different grades for the light blue painted head Taiwan Boba Fett, almost half of them are AFA 85s, which I find fascinating. I would not think that would be the case, but given that they only appeared on Return of the Jedi card backs, to my knowledge, that it makes a little more sense, just because Return of the Jedi figures were more heavily collected by collectors back in the day than the other lines, right? By the time you got to Return of the Jedi, you knew you had a cultural phenomenon that was Star Wars. So the really smart adults during that time frame, they already started collecting these and not touching them, not opening them or whatever. So 32 of the 68 graded on the population report are AFA 85s, 6 are AFA 85 plus, 3 90s, and then only 1 90 plus, which is that one that sold in this auction. So AFA U90 plus, and that one did sell in an auction for $4,350, a big number, not terribly surprising, probably about as good as you're going to do, right? I always say this is not really a good item for eBay. It should have been sold on Hakes or Heritage or whatever, but do you really think it would go for more than $4,350 on any of those other websites? I'm not convinced that it would, personally. Maybe it would. Maybe some, Arabian sheik who has, millions and millions of billions of dollars, they're not going to be checking eBay, but if they see it on Hakes, maybe they throw out a wild bid of $5,000 or $10,000 and just get into a bidding war with another, sheik. So who knows? But from my perspective, I think that's a fairly realistic sales price, and what I think it's probably about worth that, just given the information that we just looked at for the population report. So $4,350, it was more than I was expecting, but am I surprised that it sold for that? Not really. And then the other one was an uncirculated 90 plus Yoda orange snake that sold for $1,101, which is a big number as well. And then going back to the spreadsheet that Jason put together, so I pulled up the Yodas for the orange snake light green head. 1,289 of them have been graded. And if you remember, we talk about that. The light green orange snake Yoda is probably one of the most heavily produced figures from the Kenner line, because the 32 back B is where this figure first started showing up. And that particular card back, the 32B Yoda, is one of the most heavily produced. And so you're looking at the population report, you can see there's 612 AFA 85s. So over almost half of them are, of all of them graded, are 85s. You got 42 AFA 85 pluses, 51 90s, but only 2 90 pluses. So this is one of two on the population report that sold, and it sold for 1101. So big number, but again, maybe not terribly surprising. Not a number I'd particularly pay, but I can understand it. Back to some mint on cards. We had a beautiful 31 back Rebel Commander, and there's the back of the card there. So this is, I guess, the debut card. I don't know if it's a 31A or B or whatever, but I'm going to call it the debut card. It's for the Hoth Rebel Soldier, not the Commander. It was in pretty good shape. It looked to be clear blister. You could maybe make an argument on the right-hand side that it might have some yellowing going on, but if it is, it's very faint. It looks clear to me. Unpunched with a small price sticker, or a pretty big price sticker, I should say, in the upper right. 305 though, feels like a pretty good deal on that one. We had an AFA 85 yellowed 65 back A Biker Scout, just light yellowing to the blister. Punched example with a price sticker, 455 on that one. Red Vintage Toys. Nick over there does a good job. Trusted seller there. Next up is another Biker Scout. This had the coin offer 77 bag. You can see a little bit more yellowing to this blister. Unpunched with a Montgomery Ward price sticker. Love Montgomery Ward growing up. With the coin offer, 202.50 on that one. We had a Hoth Stormtrooper on the 41 back E. This is a collector-friendly example. Heavy blister damage, dings to the blister, and obviously yellowed. So this is a, buy it and hold it, don't grade it type of item. 237.50 on that one. We had what looked to be a clear blister 9-num on the 65 back A, which the 65 backs do tend to stay a little bit more clear blister. Looking at it, it looks clear to me. I don't know what it would score, but if it would, they would call it a clear or yellowed blister. But to me, it looks like a clear blister. Punched example. That one sold for 106.38. Pretty decent deal there. Here's the transition 9-num 48 back for Greedo. This one I thought was a pretty good deal at 273.88. Clear blister, it's a transition card. Is it perfect? No, but probably about as cheap as you're going to get for the 48 back transition card. I feel like that was a pretty good deal there, if not a great deal. And then we had a 79 back B for the Emperor, yellowed obviously, which almost every single Emperor mint on card is yellowed. This one was unpunched with a Fedco price sticker. That one sold for $310. Pretty healthy number, but this one was probably in about 75 plus or 80 grade condition. Very nice example for the 79 back Emperor. This I thought was a particularly good deal. This was a Trilogo EV99. The blister is still clear on this one. This is one that's kind of notorious for yellowing slightly. To me, it still looks clear blister, and it was an overall excellent condition and should grade very well. This, I think if you bought this one, this is one I would grade, because we've seen some graded examples of the Trilogo EV99 go for some stupid prices. I mean, over $1,000. I think this one's got a pretty decent chance at an overall 80 plus or potentially even an 85, given the condition of this one. So $490 feels like a bargain to me for the EV99 Trilogo. We had a Power of the Force Ben Kenobi that sold down in Australia. Shout out to my buddy Usual Mike. This one I thought was I guess it's a fair deal. I've seen them go cheaper, but I do feel like in general that the Power of the Force Ben Kenobi is kind of tough to get a hold of. And this one was in pretty good shape. I think it probably grades about an 80 grade, just based on what I can see here. And it sold for $498 US. So it's a big number, but I have seen examples in similar condition go around this price, maybe slightly lower, like $450, $430. But I can understand paying up for that one because it did look like a pretty clean example. And then two collector-friendly examples from the Ewoks line that sold. First is Wicket W. Warwick, heavy creasing to the card. That sold at $480, but given that a loose complete figure for this particular work Wicket W. Warwick goes for, $300 to $350 minimum, I think that was a pretty fair deal for a mint on card. This was made in the Letty factory, as was this Logray. This one had even more creases on the card back and sold for $260. In higher grade, you're probably talking $400 to $450 for this Logray Ewoks mint on card in higher grade condition. So probably about right for the mint on card Logray. That's all I really had for this video. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.